Hello and welcome to the second episode of the 1100 project with me, Stuart White. I'd like to start off, first of all, this episode by saying a huge thank you to everyone following my first post on social media regarding this project and my plans for self-publishing my novel. It was quite it's quite emotional and overwhelming, to be honest, to absorb all of that level of support for the months that I've been planning this project and putting things in place and doing all the things behind the scenes that I've needed to do to get it to the stage that it's at in the process. I have been very focused on those particular details and so on. I've not really thought about, I guess, perception of other people or how people might receive the project and the idea, and obviously the plans for publishing as well. Because there's a lot of baggage that goes with self publishing, and I'm going to actually talk a little bit more about that in this episode. But yeah, a lot of baggage that comes with it, and that inevitably has raised little voices in my head, uh, unjustified ones that I don't want in there, and that I do try to keep out, but nevertheless have been there. And I think as I came closer to telling people about what I was going to do and recording the first podcast last week, the voices in my head were at an all time high. They were as loud as they've been before, almost screaming. And I won't tell you the things that they're saying, but words like imposter, um, giving up, taking the easy option, all these kind of things had been circulating in my head, and I don't actually believe that, but there's just a little part of my neurological wiring left over from maybe how I previously thought that hasn't quite realigned and hasn't had the flexibility to slot into place with the rest of my brain and my neurons. So that is still probably going to take some time, but as I say, I'll talk a little bit more about those specifics and the things that sometimes get bandied about when people discuss going down this particular pathway. But yes, thank you for all the really kind words, the level of support that I received after I messaged on Twitter, and obviously popped it on my Instagram and TikTok as well. You can pop on there. Actually, I'm doing a lot of video content on TikTok, not necessarily of the most serious variety all the time, but I will talk a little bit about this journey in short form over there. And yeah, I don't really use Instagram too much, but again, that's another platform that I do post content to occasionally. But yes, thank you for all the messages and support and everything that everyone gave me across all of those different platforms. It really did mean a lot, and it has emboldened me and given me a lot more confidence about the path that I have confirmed to myself as the one that I'm going to be going down in the near future. So yeah, I mean, and obviously, I should also point out at this stage, those who have been receiving my newsletter over the last couple of months obviously had a bit more of an insight into this, and I'd mentioned some of this already to those who were good enough to sign up for my newsletter, and that meant a lot as well. And I'm obviously going to continue to communicate in the way that I usually do. You know, if you signed up for a Right Mentor newsletter before, you know that I 2 weeks out of every four, I do a final word, and we talk a little bit about the realistic side of the writing life, and I'll continue to do that and regarding my own personal sort of journey, but also in a way that's relatable to all of you that are listening as I continue with my newsletter. So again, that's somewhere else where you could probably sign up if you wanted to follow the journey in the project and see how it goes, but also just to get that additional level of insight from me that I'll be doing every month over the next 12 months and potentially beyond. We'll see how things go. You never know; things might go better than even the most negative voices in my head yell at me. So we'll see how that goes over the next 12 months. But yes, sign up for my newsletter if you haven't just yet. It's on my Twitter bio in the link tree there. So, yes, there's a lot to unpackage and to discuss in this particular episode. It's one that I wanted to do quite early on because it will be things that everyone who's listening to this episode, it'll be things that you've all thought, and you might not publicly ever admit it. You might not, or you might, but then maybe after we've discussed it today, you might have changed your perception or mind on that particular thing a little bit, even if not entirely. So before I get into that, something I mentioned last episode, which a couple of people had asked me about actually afterwards, was about the previous offers that I've had and why I've decided that going traditional via an agent or a publisher, and with the offers I've had in the past and opportunities I've had in the past to do that, why have I not stuck with that? Why didn't I go through with that when I got offers? Because obviously I have queried a lot of agents. I've been on submission to editors. I've had offers from small publishers. Not. I'm not saying that I've turned down a six-figure deal or anything, but small offers where my book would have been in print at no cost to me. The publisher would have obviously leveled all that, and it would have been it would have been an acceptable outcome. But there's a few reasons why, and I'll talk maybe a wee bit more specifically without mentioning any names why I've decided not to maybe go down that route. And I think a lot of it is to do with what my expectations are, what I want out of doing this. So primarily, what I want is for the book to get into children's hands and for them to read it. Now, you might think, well, surely the best method for that, the best route, is to go traditional. And I would have agreed with you for a long time, and there's part of me now that maybe would agree that that might even be a better route even now. But you don't know, you never ever know, and this is where I've got to with my thinking. When there's so much doubt and is dependent on so many other people's decisions, I don't think I at this stage where I'm at, and in terms of my age, in terms of how long I've been writing, in terms of what I want, that is not the route that I necessarily want to go down at this stage. I want to have things in my life where the outcomes are determined by what I do, by the work that I put into it. And I understand why a lot of people might say, well, that's just you giving up, and you could keep trying with the traditional thing. But just to sort of put it in context, when I think when and this is a side point actually, when people first discover the writing and how you can get published, and they read the blog posts and so on, it feels a little bit like you sleepwalk into a belief that there is only one very linear pathway to get published. And that is obviously amplified by the fact that most successful authors are traditionally published. And there are exceptions to this, but most are. And they have done that. And that's traditionally how people have always been published. And so I think it's easy to sort of, as I say, sleepwalk into that feeling that there's just one route. And of course, that's not true. And as time goes on, the number of routes that are sprouting up to enable you to achieve your goals of getting your book into the hands of a reader, they are multiplying. And we're and that's how evolution works. That's how things change over time. There should be more branches in the evolutionary tree. If there isn't, then something's going badly wrong. But for a while there has only been that singular branch, and it's and then for a while there was like self-publishing, but a different form of self-publishing to what we're able to do now. And there are now other things. There's crowdfunders, for example. You go to someone like Unbound, or you do your own Kickstarter, whatever. You can crowdfund the money that is required to get your book into production. And that's another point I maybe should address just now as well. I've decided not to go down that route. One of my good writing friends, Emma, was asking me why, if I'd considered it, and why I didn't do it the other day. And the reason for it, for me anyway, was the expectation that comes with doing a crowdfunder, and what all the promises that you have to make to people. And even when you do that, and you obviously then have to deliver upon that once you meet the target, it adds a lot of work onto what is already a big workload if you're independently publishing that book. There's obviously Unbound where they sort of take care of a lot of that stuff for you. But again, I believe their model is if you don't meet the target, it doesn't get published. And so that's obviously you might do 2 3 months of crowdfunding and doing a lot of work and raising actually a lot of money, but not quite making your target, and therefore you're almost back to stage one again. And anyway, there's a lot of reasons why I didn't decide to go down that route, but it is one that is open to people, and I know that some people have gone down it before, and some people have been quite happy with it as well. So it's again another possibility for you if you are listening. But yes, I have also diverged. I've gone off my own evolutionary line away from the main line that this podcast was supposed to take. But I was discussing how there are a number of different pathways and why I've diverged a little bit from the traditional one. So and I actually have, as I say, I've had offers for deals in the past which I've decided not to go with for a few reasons. Um, Maybe the publisher's ambition wasn't as big as mine. They weren't willing to give guarantees on certain things that I wanted. They weren't willing to raise the royalty rates as high as I wanted, etc., etc. And that maybe makes me sound a bit like a diva and really demanding. But I think anyone who's ever spoken to me or knows me well knows that that's not the case. However, I believe that you shouldn't ever enter into an agreement like that, a huge contractual agreement, unless you are entirely happy with the conditions and they benefit you in the way that you should be benefited or rewarded for the level of work that you put into it. And it's something I see with traditional contracts, and sometimes people share them with me via Right Mentor and say, "How does this look compared to other ones you've seen?" Blah blah. And sometimes I'm like, you need to get that clause, that clause, that you need to get all these looked at because those are you're giving away too much for too little, basically. And that's obviously an issue that comes with maybe signing with a small press without an agent who would obviously be there in your corner to make sure those things weren't involved. And that's another thing. If you do go down the route of signing with an indie publisher, there are people who will check your contract. The Society of Authors in the UK is a good example of that. But I know one of my good friends had someone else who was recommended to them check out their contract, and they then got a number of things changed and altered in the indie contract, and it was much more to their liking after that. So you do have to make sure that every single thing is to your liking. It's got to be about what you want. Ultimately, you can't sign away a huge chunk of work that you've done. Sometimes spending years on it for nothing or for very little anyway. And if things do go well with it and you've signed away all your rights, you're not going to see the returns that you should see, that you deserve to see for the work that you put in. So that's obviously indie publishers. If you go without an agent should steer you right. The majority of agents I know and that we work with at Right Mentor and so on are good agents, and they'll always send you in the and this is the thing about agents, and it's well worth remembering this. They obviously they work on commission, 15% of your of what you make. So it's in in their best interest, to their advantage, to make sure that you get the best possible deal. So if you're with an agent, they should always be in your corner and always be looking out for things like that. But yes, again, I diverge. I queried my most recent book in March it was, and I had an offer to be represented for that book and for it to go out to publishers and so on. And I had a kind of the standard 2 week wait time and think about taking that offer. And it was a really difficult one for me. The agent is really nice, uh, very enthusiastic. I didn't really have a lot of reasons from them individually to say no, and in fact a big part of me just wanted to say yes and go for it and see what happens. But it all came back down to what I was talking about earlier on about what my vision or my expectations are of what I want to do. And there was just a few things circling in my head at that time because I was already well into the idea of thinking about this particular project, and I weighed the two up, and I thought, okay, I could sign with this agent and I'll go out and submission to publishers, and there's a good chance I won't get signed with anyone. And this is another thing to remember if you are querying agents and aren't at that stage yet, that um, people who sign with agents but don't get publishing deals don't talk about it very much. So you don't know how often that actually happens, and it happens obviously a lot. People end up splitting up with that agent, and sometimes they end up in a worse position than they were before they signed with them. I've been in a similar position myself where I've signed with an agent and things haven't worked out, and it's actually you're definitely in a worse position after the end of that relationship than you were before you went into it, and that obviously made me wary this time, and so I made the decision ultimately, and it was a hard one to do because there was a lot of enticing things about the offer that I got, and a lot of nice words were said, and opportunities were laid before me, and it was hard to say no, but I stayed true to my own my set of values and convictions and beliefs about what I want, and what my vision is for how I get my books out and get them published and so on. I just didn't want to go into a relationship where there's a chance that it would not work out well, and I would I would regret having gone into that. And I know that there's a part of that's contradictory because I've said in episode one here that sometimes you just need to take a blind leap at something and possibly fail and then pick yourself up again and go again. But the idea of failing is that you learn something from it, you gain wisdom, and you apply that newfound knowledge or wisdom to the next time you face that situation. And I think that's probably what I did, and why I ended up turning it down, and then more concretely deciding to go down this particular pathway. I mean, that's not the whole story. There was other little things as well, like an agent who offered to sort of work with me from the idea stage and develop something and so on. But again, that fell through. So that there has been other things which have maybe taken my eye from this particular route and have delayed how quickly I've gone about doing it. But that is how the industry is. There is a lot of shiny diamonds at the top, and there's a lot of romantic stories and ideals about how we should be getting signed, and how we should go about getting the deals and so on. And we want to we want to go down the same pathways and footsteps as some of the authors that we love and admire. But it is not for everyone, and I hope that the if you only take one thing from this podcast and from listening to me, it is that there are other pathways, there are other ways to do things. You have the power to determine that, and power is something I talk about a lot when I'm speaking to people about this, because there's no there's not no power, but there's a lot less power when you go down the traditional route. There's a lot of people doing things on your behalf, a lot of people making decisions on your behalf, a lot of things you don't get a huge amount of input into, and that's difficult, especially if you're as controlling as I am about aspects of um, my own life. I like to be in control of things that I do, and you probably know that from any interactions you've had with me. And so it's hard to let go of that. Whereas going down this route, I have retained not 100%, but certainly a large proportion of the power and control over the direction that things go in creatively. And we'll talk more about the specifics of that in a subsequent episode. And in fact, in a series of subsequent episodes where we look at all the specific elements. So, yeah, I thought that was worth sharing because I think sometimes people maybe would say, okay, so why did you turn down deals and offers, and why didn't you just continue down the traditional route? Have you just given up and decided to walk away and do something that's a little bit easier? And I'm going to come on to that in a minute, because I actually think I've probably done the harder of the two things. Um, I think going down the other route for me anyway would have been an easier option. And I think one thing that comes with age and a little bit of experience is that you don't always choose the easier options or the options that you think, oh, that's the right thing to do. That's what everyone else would do, and so that's what I'm going to do. Sometimes you have to buck the trend a little bit and say, well, I'm actually going to do things a wee bit differently. I'm going to do it the way I want to do it, my way, and that 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 brings with it a lot of confidence, a lot of empowerment, a lot of a lot of feeling of you're in control and you're behind the steering wheel of your own car to wherever you're going. So I've said the word power, empowerment, control, autonomy. I say those words all the time, but I guess it's the teacher in me. I like to emphasize and repeat keywords over and over, and that's hopefully the message and the feeling that people take away from listening to the podcast. So let's um, let's get on to some of the assumptions that people make about self-publishing and debunk a few of them, and to discuss how I've thought about all those things and how maybe I've changed my mind a little bit about how they're applicable to my situation. So one of the first ones that people say, and I just mentioned it a few minutes ago, there is if you self-publish, it means that you have failed to to get published traditionally, and I guess in a very um, literal way, that might well be the case. You haven't got a traditional deal, so you're taking a different option. But I guess the key thing is about, again, I'm saying my keyword, but it's about power and it's about you making the choice. It's about choice, and for me anyway, I know that I've made that choice. It's not something that I've felt like I've had to do. So take an easy option means you haven't been traditionally published. People say that a lot, and I'm sure people will continue to say it, not just about me, about other people and so on that have gone down that route. One thing I can tell you from the last 3 or 4 months of work is that it's certainly not an easy option. I definitely have done more hours towards my writing time than I've probably done in a long time, and very little of that's actually been on the writing. It's been on all the other things. It is the equivalent of starting up a small business, and that is actually literally what I've done. But I'll talk more about that in a different episode. But that is literally what I've done with this. I basically have started up a small business and looked at it in terms of, okay, we need some startup capital, we need investment to do X, Y, and Z because I want to do things right. I want to make sure the book is produced to a very high standard, equivalent to or close to equivalent to what a traditional publisher would come up with. And so when people sort of have those easy, and they're easy, this is the key thing about it, those are easy thoughts to have. The first thought that you think of when someone says anything in life is an easy thought. It's and actually it's not one often that you have originated. It's one that you have heard and it's been repeated by other people. Sort of this sort of self perpetuating bit of information that just gets passed through, and you see all the time in Twitter, like little bits of information that have been said by someone, and it just gets passed on and passed on. It's Chinese whispers, and and people like, is for example, never write a prologue or that kind of thing. It gets repeated round and round, and it kind of loses its meaning a little bit. And I guess that's what some of these assumptions about self-publishing are, and they're based upon a time when self-publishing wasn't like it is now, and they're based upon a few examples where people perhaps haven't produced the quality of book that I hope that I'm going to produce, and that many other self-published authors do produce on a regular basis already. And so, yeah, that's probably the first one to try and debunk a little bit. If you are thinking about going down that route, people still think it, and this is the problem. You can't stop people thinking negatively of anything you decide to do, of any of your choices. It is just the way of the world, and what you have to do is you have to say, okay, how important is their opinion? How important is my own feeling of self-worth and self-empowerment? And weigh those two up, and what you'll find is their opinions way down here and the other things way up here. And so that's where you've got to go. You've got to go with that latter option there, that feeling of self-empowerment, or what's important to you, your priorities, not other people's opinions on what it is that you're doing. The other thing that people often think about self-publishing is it's a lower quality. that book's been rejected by agents, and therefore it is not good enough to be published and for people to read. And again, you just have to look at the long line of self-published books which have gone on to be bestsellers, made into movies, and so on. I won't list them all just now, but there is a lot of them, and you probably know a few of them yourself. And while it is the case that there are lots of self-published novels out there which are of lower quality, it's not a universal thing. It's very much case by case dependence, I think, for that. The other thing is, it's not been well edited. People seeing the reviews, oh, it's not been spell or grammar checked or whatever. It's not had proper series of edits, the developmental edit, line copy, and proofs that you'd get with a traditional publisher. And that's something I'm going to make sure that my book does receive. Um, the obviously the associated thing with that is cost, and obviously not everyone is in a position to be able to afford all of those things. And that's why I said it a few minutes ago. It's a bit like a startup business. You have to factor in those costs initially, and ultimately, if you start a business, sometimes you have to take a loan. You have to ask family members to help you out. You have to work for free for a long time, and I'm guessing that's what's going to be the case for me. But I ultimately, my aim is a bit more than monetary things, and you might think that's easy to say if you are able to get the money to do these things. But I've never lived my life, and and I'm not by any means a rich person. I have a very average paid job as a teacher, and it's not like I'm driving about in a Mercedes and have tons of cash to burn. But I've been careful with saving a little bit and so on, and putting that aside for this big goal that I have. And my family have been very supportive about it, because when you have children, it can seem a luxury to spend money on production of a book that you don't know you're necessarily going to see the return on. And that's obviously been a big decision that I've had to make as well. And it's not an easy decision, that, because that money that goes towards getting your 4 rounds of edits, or paying your illustrator, or paying for publicity, or paying all the different things that self-publishing involves, and we'll have an episode on all that. Once you've done all that, it burns through a lot of money, and you've got to weigh that up with, okay, so that's my child might not be able to do XYZ, or we can't go away on a family holiday, or whatever as a result of that. And all these things weigh heavy on my mind as I make the decisions. It's not easy. And so you have to weigh up, and it has to be about personal circumstance and priorities. And for a lot of people, they just say, I'm not willing to spend that money, and I will stick it out and go with the trad route, because I won't have to pay out money. And that's fine. And all power to you if that's the route that you go down. But for me, it's this route that I'm going to go down, and I have set aside the money, and it will go through all the same stages that a traditionally published book would, and I hope be produced to a similar or close to similar standard. And this is something, we'll talk about this in another episode, but there are lots of people out there, lots of freelance people, that the publishers themselves actually they use the same freelancers that are available to use a self-published author. Although obviously, again, there's associated financial barrier there perhaps for a lot of people, but they are out there, and they are available, and there's no reason, aside from the monetary one, that they wouldn't necessarily work with you. I've found people to be quite happy to work with me, even though even though they actually work for publishers, and I am not a traditionally published author, or about to become one anytime soon either. So that's something to bear in mind as well. Self-published authors often spam you a little bit, especially on Twitter. You see them posting a lot about their book, and they say things like "buy my book," and then they're not actually. It's social media. They should be socializing. They should be chatting with you, and and it should be incidental, the whole sales side of things, and that gives self-publishing a bad name, unfortunately, because people do that incessantly, and that's obviously something that people like me have to come along and try and do it in a different way, and make sure that I am not that spammy self-published author that's constantly posting about my book and trying to get people to buy it and so on, because people expect social media to be about social. So yeah, less of the spamming, and you'll do all right, I think. Remember social media. Remember the first word in that title there. So yeah, there are lots of assumptions people make about self-publishing. There's just a few of them. Sort of debunked a few of them and made a bit more light of them. And as I say, it's about the way you do it. It's not so much that you're doing it. It's about the way that you do it, and that's what I'm hoping that with the way I go about it, people will see it in a slightly different light. So yes, we are going to be doing over the next few weeks a series of episodes where I actually talk to some of the other people involved in self-publishing, because actually self-publishing is a bit of a misnomer in terms of what we call it, because it says self-publishing, but actually if you're doing it properly, you're not doing it yourself. You're working with a small or sometimes a larger team of people to collaborate with and produce all the various elements that are involved in it, from editors to formatters to illustrators to publicists, and everyone else that's involved in the process. So it is a collaborative and team effort in much the same way as you'd experience in a trad publisher. The only thing is that you are essentially the sort of manager of those teams. You're collaborating everything together, and you're the glue in it all. So that's something that's also worth considering if you're going down that route. Is, can you be a manager too? Can you hold people accountable to deadlines? Can you make contracts, with the people involved, because you have to do that? And yeah, there's more than just the as the name would suggest, the self involved. And sometimes people do self publish to a high standard where they don't actually have a lot of people involved. And again, all power to them. I don't think I personally have the skills. I certainly couldn't do a cover, for example. Even if I did my very best on Canva, I certainly couldn't do the editing myself. I don't have a good enough self-editing brain to put my manuscript into the shape that I'd want it to be, for going out there and being competitive amongst lots and lots of other traditionally published titles as well. So yeah, it's definitely a team effort, and you've got to be willing to lead that team if you go down that particular route. So the next thing I wanted to discuss as well today was about the figures and the name of this project. We're calling it the 1100 project, but again, where have those numbers come from? Why have I called it that and not the, as Catherine Emmett jokingly said on Twitter, the 999.99 project, or something similar? A lot of authors talk a lot about the magic 50 in terms of reviews on Amazon, etc., and how that awakens some sort of secret algorithm that suddenly makes their book appear everywhere, and it sells in its droves. I don't know about the exact details of that, but that was a baseline figure for me, and I just thought I'd top that up and give it a nice number, because actually, when I thought about sales and I arrived at 1,000, then 1,100 made more sense than 1,050, I think, and that's why we're going for that specific target. It's maybe a little bit imbalanced, because if you look at book sales and the number of reviews that the book has, often it's not that 1 to 10 ratio. It's far greater, because people don't leave reviews as often as authors would like them to. So it's obviously a wee bit skewed in that way, but that's the reason why it's 100. And the 1,000 comes from the benefit of talking to a lot of authors, some of whom are willing to share how many books they've sold. And this is something that, if you're not published and you haven't had the experience of this, it can be tricky to get your head around. Like, what's a good number of books to sell, and how many should you sell in the first 3 months, or the first year, or first 6, or whatever it happens to be. And I know, my friend Sally, for example, she's only at 1,000 on the self-published side, and so that was partly why the 1,000 came into it for me. But also, I've got other traditionally published author friends as well, who haven't sold 1,000 copies of their books. They've received advances, which, I'm assuming if they haven't sold 1,000 copies, probably aren't that close to earning out, and so on. And it's just worthwhile people knowing that just because you get traditionally published doesn't mean to say you're going to be selling in the thousands. Some people do struggle to make it to the 1,000 mark, for a variety of reasons. and that, that might be of no fault of their own. It might just be to do with how well marketed the book is, or how well it gets distributed to to shops and so on. And there's way more factors than just that alone. But yes, I just thought that would be a good target, and it's a good starting point, because I may well exceed that. I would be amazing if I did. I may well fall short as well, and I'm very realistic about that. And I don't think, although it's an outcome based goal, I don't really feel that it's something that matters significantly to me. I'll if I get to that stage, I'll probably celebrate and I'll be happy, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing for me is about qualitative things. So it's about producing the very best book and story that I can. It's about making sure that the cover is the best it can be. It's distributed to people in the most efficient way that I can via self publishing. And there's a lot of other markers that I've got in my head which are more important than the literal sales and reviews numbers. Um, so that's not a hugely important thing for me, but it's just there as a marker, and I think that's in every element of life. It's always good just to have sort of these baseline things to aim for, because it does help you a little bit to focus on something, even if you're not a quantitative type of person, or you're not using that as your marker for what you want to achieve. And so the last thing I wanted to talk about in this second episode of the podcast was just what my first steps were when when I came up with the idea of self publishing, and what I thought I should be doing, and how I went about it initially, because that is probably the most daunting thing for people when they first think, okay, I want to self publish a book. What do I do first? So when I started out, the first thing that entered my head was, how do I actually get my book printed? And that was the first part of the exploration, was what are the different ways in which you can do that via the self-publishing route. And again, this is going to be part of the ongoing podcast, and we'll discuss this in more detail, and I'll try and give you some ideas and ways in which you can do that, both for free, or for very little expense, and also look at the other options as well, if you're looking to do other things beyond an ebook. Maybe if you want to do a paperback or a hardback. And as I said in the last episode, for if you're writing a middle grade or below, you really need to be doing a paperback. You can't get away with just doing an ebook, or you can, obviously, but you just not the majority of people at that age group are parents buying for children. It's like 90% that buy paperback over ebook. And YA and above, the ebook paperback spread is a bit more equal. I think it's 40% each, with the rest to audiobook to make up the 100, obviously. And it's different. It's a different demographic. It's a different person purchasing, and so it's a different way that you can go about giving people a choice in which format to read it. So yeah, if you're writing for kids, you really need to do a paperback. But as I say, I'll talk more about this in a different episode, because there was a lot that I found out and wrote down at the time about that process. But yeah, how does it get published? And there, as I say, there's a few ways to do that. And there are also, and it's worth remembering this, if you are, if you have a lot of money to spare, there are also companies that will actually just do the whole process for you, and you just hand them a manuscript, and they'll do all the other stuff for you. And in fact, almost every part of self-publishing has experts in each particular specialism that you could just farm things out to. So it's up to you. I mean, and this is the great thing about self-publishing, it's up to you how much of it you actually do yourself, or you give out to experts, to industry professionals, people who have done this thing a lot. So that was one of the first things I looked at, was how does it actually get printed. Then I thought about things like, okay, so if 90 odd percent of the books are bought by parents in a paperback, that means that is how I'm going to have to present it. I'm going to have to present it to parents, and it's got to obviously be appealing to kids too. But you've also got to think about the person buying it, and you've got to think about how do they actually get it in their hands. I'm not going to have a big front row shelf on Tesco or anything. So how am I actually going to do that? And I thought about all the different ways I could do that, and I've been thinking about various ways in which I'm a school teacher, obviously, by by day, and which means that I've got a lot of interaction with kids of the age group that my book will be targeted towards. And I can obviously, and we have a creative writing club at school and so on, and I can ask the kids their thoughts on various things. But to get a sort of wider, more representative view, that's obviously a bit more tricky. But I've come up with a lot of ideas and ways in which I think I can do that and distribute it and get it out to the kids into their hands. And you've got to think about things. Okay, well, maybe start looking at developing relationships with booksellers that some that you already know, and develop that relationship further and see if they'll potentially sell your book for you, or maybe make new ones as well. And I don't want this to. The problem with this is, with saying stuff like that, is it makes it feel like self-publishing, you become a bit of like a glorified salesperson for your own book, and you've got to make connections, and it sounds all really sort of businessy, and and not really what a lot of us got into writing for, and not the reason why we write for kids. We didn't really see ourselves doing that role. And again, that's fine. If it's not for you, then that's it's probably something that you can farm out to people if you've got the money, or you just don't do, but you still self-publish, or you just don't self-publish. And that there's a myriad of options and different ways in which you can go about all of the elements of this, and that's what I quite like about it, I think. And then I started thinking, okay, so how long is it going to take me to go through the various stages of editing to find a cover illustrator to get them to obviously produce that, to get a timely pre-order campaign, and I sort of made a timeline of the various things that have to do and how long they'd roughly take and so on, which is how I arrived at my January 2023 publication date. And at the moment, I'm hopeful that I'd still be on track for that. But I'm trying to keep it flexible at the moment, and that is the good thing as well. With traditional publishing, obviously dates can change as well. There's obviously that's happened to a lot of people, especially over the pandemic period, and they've had to adjust and so on. And that affects traditionally published authors because a proportion of their advance is paid on upon publication, and so if that gets moved into the future, then that's them further away from their money. But for me, obviously, it's a little bit more flexibility because no, nobody else is really too bothered about when it comes out, except from obviously myself. So that is another great advantage and one of the benefits of doing it this way. But it's all been factored in. I've created a timeline, so on, and over the next few episodes, we'll talk a little bit about the different elements of the timeline, the things you have to slot together, because you end up with a spreadsheet that's got all these little coloured portions along the timeline, and it shows you when you have to start thinking about and doing things, and when you need to send your manuscript off to the editor to get the developmental edit, when you need it back, and then when you have to go through those edits and then send it back to either the same or a different editor, and so on at each stage. When you need your illustrator to have the cover so that you can do a cover reveal, and you can do a pre-order campaign, and all of the rest of these things. So the timeline, it becomes quite a fascinating document to look at, and that's maybe something I'll share actually in one of my newsletters, because it's a visual thing, and not as appropriate for the podcast, although I'm sure I could probably pop it on a video easy enough at some point. So yeah, these are all things that I've obviously been ruminating in my head as I've started in the process, and now that I'm feeling more confident with the timeline and so on, that is why I've decided now is the time to start talking about it a little bit more, and to get people aware that I'm going to be doing this. And actually, and this is a big thing for me. A lot of people self-publish, but they're a little bit ashamed of it, and so they don't really say either that they're publishing and self-publishing, or they say they're publishing, but they try and hide the self part of it, and that I don't think that's particularly helpful to the reputation of this particular stream of getting your book out there. And so that is something that for me anyway was important, was that I didn't shy away from what I'm doing, that it is the self-publishing route. It's not traditional publishing, it's not with a small independent publisher, it's self-publishing. And more than just not shying away from it, I'll proudly say that's what I'm doing. And if anyone asks me, I'll say that. I won't try and hide behind it. So, for example, when you put your book up on Amazon and Ingram Spark and so on, you have to put in a publisher name, and it can be easy just to say, "Oh, that's just a legitimate publisher," but I won't shy away from that. That said, and I said this in the last episode, I think the readers don't look up who the publisher is. I've never. decided, oh, I really like the look of that book, but I'm going to check who the publisher is first before I decide to try that book, because that's important. 'Cause nobody cares. Readers don't care. The only people that care are other authors and people in the industry and so on. And so that is something to bear in mind as well. If you decide to go down this route, there's a little bit of ingrained snobbery with other people, but the actual people who read your book, they don't really care if it's self-published or traditionally published. They just want a good story. And if you produce your self-published book to the same standard or as close as you can to a traditionally published book, and it's engaging and kids love it and so on, you do all the right things in terms of storycraft and creating something that people are going to engage with, then you've done the job. And the person that reads the book is not going to care where it's been printed, whether it's via your own um, made up press or whether it's via all the big publishers. I won't name any of them on the podcast and give them any more airtime than they need, because they're obviously all doing quite well for themselves as it stands at the moment. And I certainly won't wade into other things I've seen in social media about big publishers at the moment either, which you can look up for yourselves if you're on Twitter anytime soon. Which leads me to the end of this second episode of the podcast. So we've covered quite a lot in this episode. We've had a look at the different assumptions people make. We've debunked them. We've talked about a little bit about my journey and why I've decided to go with this and so on, and why I've not taken other options. And I'm going to just end the podcast with a reiteration of where we started, which is to say thank you to everyone for the love and the positivity and the great level of support that you all offered me when I announced this last week. And I hope you continue to listen to the podcast. The life cycle of a podcast goes like this. Lots of people listen to the first episode and then it drops off. It's the same with book series as well. And if you're a self-published series author, you'll know that, or even traditionally published and you're looking at the numbers, you'll see that as well. And what I'm hoping to do is to keep people engaged in the podcast, and that actually the listenership will grow rather than fall as time goes on. So please tell people about it if you've enjoyed it and you think the content is worth listening to. I would love to have more people follow the journey, but also I want this to be about giving back to you as well, and giving you insights and ideas into how you can plan your own particular publishing journey. So thanks very much for joining me this time, and I'll speak to you all next time on the 1,100 Project podcast. Bye for now.